Occlusion culling is a rendering technique that disables the objects player can't see at the moment, which will help you to increase performance. In my project, I have just this simplicity that you can also download in the description. Right now, as the player is looking in this way, we are actually not just loading all of these objects, but we have also all of the objects that are behind the player, which we don't actually need. So let's use occlusion culling for that. We'll go to Window, Rendering, and open the occlusion culling window. And later, we'll be able to easily bake the occlusion. But before we do that, we need to mark some of the objects as occluders and others as occludees. Occluder is an object that can block other objects. So when the player is looking, let's say, at a wall, we can mark it as a occluder, which means that all of the objects that will be behind it will be occluded, so we won't be able to see them. And so that we don't see the objects behind the wall, we need to mark them as occludees, which means that we can't see them if there is an occluder in front of them. I will select my city parent, go to the inspector, and the first way to mark all of the objects as occluders and occludees, in my case it will be just the city, you can just set it to static and that's all. So in order to use occlusion culling, those objects have to be static, so it means that you can't move with them, but there are also some exceptions where we will be able to make static occludees. Now we can just click this drop down next to the static and we can select if we want them to be either just occludees or just occluders. But in this case I will leave them all as occluders and occludees at the same time. Then we'll go to the occlusion panel, go to the bake panel and we'll just hit bake. Now you also want to select your camera, and in the camera component you want to make sure that occlusion culling is enabled. Now as we play the game you may not be able to notice any differences, but if we go to Scene, select the camera, open the occlusion window, down here we can also select the occlusion culling mode to visualize, and now we can see only the objects that the player can actually see right now, which are these houses, some of these trees, but you can see that the floor disappeared and all of these other houses disappeared. And as I'm rotating the player, you can see that other objects are appearing and disappearing based on the direction where we are looking. So this on its own should help you to improve performance. You can see that it is really simple. So what if we have some dynamic objects that are moving and we want them to use occlusion culling? Because as I said, occlusion culling can be only used with static objects, or can it? You can make a dynamic object occludee, but not an occluder. So when the camera is not looking at it, it will not be seen, but it can't block other objects. So to do that, just select the object and in the mesh renderer tick dynamic occlusion, which is already ticked by default. But what if we have some dynamic object that is moving like a door, but we also want it to be occluder at the same time? We can just use the occluder portal component, where you can specify the size, let's say of the door, and then when the door is open, you can just hit open, and all of the objects that are behind the portal will be rendered, and if you set it to closed, it will be blocking objects, even though it is not marked as static. And when we are baking the occlusion, in the occlusion tab, we also have some additional settings. For example, the smallest occluder, which is just the size of the smallest occluder, so if you want even some tiny pebbles to be blocking other objects, you can set this to some low number. And smallest hole, so if you have some trees or leaves and you also want these small holes to be registered as holes, you can just decrease the smallest hole value. And the backface threshold is just deciding when you should be able to see the backface, which is like when you are inside an object. Usually you want to keep this at 100 or some higher number, because as you lower it, some weird artifacts may appear. And one more useful component is the occlusion area, which just allows you to put many objects just into one occlusion area, so if the player is looking at any of these objects in the area, it will automatically set all of the objects in the area to active. And that's it for the occlusion culling. You can see that it is really simple to set up. And if you are asking me about occlusion culling for dots, I wouldn't recommend it to you, because as I was trying to get it working, my Unity crashed like 5 times, so it is kind of unstable, at least on my machine. I hope this video was useful to you. If you have any questions or suggestions, drop them down to the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I will see you in next videos. Bye! Thanks for watching this video till the end. If you are looking for a Unity, C# or Bolt tutor, then I am here for you, so feel free to send me a message to my Gmail and take a look at my website for more info. I can help you with your personal projects or teach you anything about game development you would want to know. You are welcome.